Hello, this is National Chess Master R. Rats at chess.com, continuing my video series on the correspondence team match played between my video lessons group and the team CARPE DIEM. This was played on board 52. Our man is aksuited against Raymondovski. Rating advantage low 2000s versus high 1800s. This will likely be the last video of the series because there's only one match remaining, one game remaining, and our man there is down 0-1 and probably going to lose his last game. He's down a piece in the ending, so if he wins it, he'll get a video of that game, but I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, so let's have a look at these two games. And I want to thank everyone that's made it this far. If you've watched each and every one of them, hopefully you've learned a whole lot about chess and definitely learned some of the arts of how to play correspondence chess to the maximum. Anyway, we have the Caro-Kann defense, a very level type opening, and White captures on. Let me back this up. I think they call this the Nimzovich line, or maybe the Nimzovich line is when they take back with the G pawn. But taking with the E pawn is certainly a path to equality, even though White has a queenside pawn majority, and the Black kingside pawn majority is negated by the double pawn. Similar to the Ruy Lopez exchange variation, where essentially if White can eliminate all the pieces, White will win the king and pawn ending. We could argue the same thing's true here, but there's some differences. It's not that easy to get. Eventually, if White's going to get a pass pawn, it's going to be a D pawn. But the Black position is rock solid, and even though Black didn't pick up the bishop pair in here, he's doing fine. This pawn on f6 is doing a marvelous job keeping a white knight out of e5. Anyway, let's go forward. And the game stays relatively even for a long time, and then White's going to commit a fatal blunder, as we will see when we get there. And now here I've been condemning rook pawn moves, but this one seems necessary. Black is getting ready to pin this knight, and it's just gonna, it'll threaten to take this pawn with check, all kinds of things. So White needs to play h3 here. So how do you tell the difference, when to push a rook pawn and when not to? Well, sometimes you have to do it by analysis. Okay, let's just take a moment and figure what's White going to do instead. Well, what do I always say to do if you're not sure what to do? Develop a piece, right? Okay, well, where's this bishop going to go? Doesn't it really have a lot of scope? It could go to d2, maybe c3. It could park itself on e3, but then it's doesn't really have much mobility. And the simple fact is, if White does play bishop e3, this pin is coming. And now, again, the threat is bishop takes check. So White's going to have to deal with that. He can't really deal with it by king h1 because the bishop may just gobble that pawn anyway. And here, I'll show you. And White can play to win the piece, but Black's getting a lot of activity here. Okay, 3 pawns for the piece, and this knight remains pinned. This knight's not going to get into play too easily. It's going to take a while to redirect itself, but I don't know. Maybe Black doesn't want to sacrifice that, but that bishop for the 3 pawns, maybe he does. And with this king on h1, he's a little out of touch for the ending. If anything, Black can just go ahead and develop his knight, as I was saying, and maintain the pin. If you kick the bishop, he's just going back to h5, and the pin is still there. And then you want to really weaken yourself a little further here. Probably not. And now if bishop takes, here's an interesting recapture. I heard somebody once called this the box. It's kind of rare. You don't see it too often. But those pawns are rock solid. And White's not going to get at them too easily. So, this game it's still about even. But, this h-pawn may become a target later in the ending. And, what does White really have? He has 2 developed pieces. So does Black. But, you know, white's trying to get an advantage out of the Caracal, and this certainly didn't do it. So playing h3 just restricts the light squared bishops of blacks, and it doesn't leave it with a whole lot of scope, because where's it going to go? Come on, play h3 for me, please. Come on, let's do it. Don't lag. There it goes. Okay. Where's black going to put this bishop? Well, you got e6. Okay, fine. But, you know, it's not going to f5, and it's not going to g4. So, the game stays relatively even, and neither side is able to generate much. But white's able to generate a little bit of an attack here, as we will see. It doesn't go anywhere because black has adequate defenses. And now, instead of playing the knight, I would think logically would want to play the knight over here. But at the same time, what's guarding the king? This pawn shield, that's it. So black goes ahead and puts his knight on f8, keeping an eye on h7, and clearing this diagonal for the bishop to maybe finally get out. Okay. And now, I don't know, g6 might be an unnecessary weakening. You know, logically, what's wrong with just developing a piece? You know, bishop e6. It's not really attacking this pawn on a2 because it's going to get trapped by b3. But still, black's maintaining a very solid position, and so white decides, well, I'm going to come in and penetrate on the dark squares that you've left open. And black says, well, hey, I'll just oppose you. So the trade didn't seem to help white at all here. Now, some tricks. If this queen comes off the diagonal that it's on, the g2 pawn becomes overworked. These are themes you need to look for in games when these rook pawns do push. But white's not going to make that blunder, but just got to make you aware of it. And still, black hasn't developed this bishop. Now, what's wrong with just putting it on f5? Well, maybe this rook will come down to e7. Maybe that's what he didn't like. Let's see. Okay. Is he afraid of this move? Well, you always have rook d7. I don't know. It just seems these rooks have to get into play, and black is not developing his queen bishop. Back up to the queen, and here comes the little attack I was talking about. But white's not going to get anywhere with it, and black starts generating his patented c5 thrust later in the Caracal, and eventually maybe this bishop will come into play on the b7 diagonal. And they move forward, and there it is. Bishop's on b7. So now the bishop's got a good diagonal, and white should probably concern himself about an eventual bishop takes f3, but he doesn't. Now the threat's on h7, but black covers that fine, and the white attack is ground to a halt, even though he's got everything pointed towards the king's side except for this rook. There's no attack in here for white. Black's solid as a rock. And here black opts to take with the pawn, giving a couple of isolated pawns, but in return he gets a half-open b file, and he maintains pressure on these two squares. You know, this pawn on c5 keeps a knight out of d4. So how does this knight get into play? You can't go forward at all. All the forward squares are covered. So here I think white does drop the ball and allows a doubling of his pawns. And, you know, what is the rook threatening there? Just doesn't have enough firepower to sacrifice on this square. Maybe he's going to consider a slower plan like this. But I still think black has adequate resources. But this just allows black to chop that off. And now suddenly white's got some weak pawns. And then black's starting to get the better of it here. Because now the black rooks look a little better than the white rooks. What's this rook doing? Well, not much. covering the fourth rank, but he's not going anywhere on the file. And this rook is blocked in by a pawn. But this rook's on an open file, and this rook will be momentarily. So now there's a fork of the queen and the rook, and white has to take, which improves the position of the black rook. And now suddenly black's on the 7th rank, and doubles his rooks. And it's at this point that white throws the game away. Just what's necessary is get the king off the back rank. And black is for choice, but there's no assurance he'll win. Probably should bring the knight to e6 to safeguard this pawn, and then it's a contest. It's a fight. The white rooks are not coordinated well. The blacks are. Black is not losing. Is black winning? Who knows? But it's a game of chess to be played. But instead, white just drops a piece, and he grabs this pawn. I don't know how much time he spent on the move, but whoops, here comes a check, and there's a fork, and off comes the bishop. And white tries to generate some counterplay, but it's just not enough. Whoops, it's going too fast. Let's see. White pushes the pawn to c6, and the rook comes back, and that pawn is going nowhere. It's just a matter of time before the extra piece will corral that pawn, and then another, and then another. So really, most of the rest of the game bears no comment. Black plays it very accurately. And now the c6 pawn is menaced. So black goes after the a pawn, but black says, no, you're not going to take that. And black goes ahead and grabs that pawn first. Brings the knight back. Next target is c6. And it's a goner. And suddenly, black has a piece and a pawn advantage. White's trying to penetrate with his king, but black stops that cold. And here, white, here went a little too quick there. Okay, chess.com has lag. Here, black could just simply take here and win, but what he does is fine. This traps the rook. White gets a little Zwischenzug, but it's not enough. His rook is a goner. And white plays on a few moves. Should have resigned the other game he's going to play on to checkmate. This one he's going to lose on time. And black just goes in with his king and starts munching up pawns. And there's really not anything white can do about it. Black is going to promote, and white can't stop it. And let's see. At this point, white lost on time, sparing this game from having to be played out to checkmate. Anyway, well played by aksuited. Let's bring the other game up and see what move number it starts it at. It's supposed to start at the beginning. We never know what it's going to do. It's always fun. Oh, look, move 8. Okay. Anyway, this game too stays pretty level until black just commits a horrible move, drops a piece. We'll see when we get there. So Philidor defense. Usually, I've talked about this in some of these other videos. The normal move is to play queen here. Here, I'll just show it to you. I think I've shown this in some of the other videos. There's an old game in Al Yekin's collection of best games, I think it's volume 1, that follows these moves. Okay. And they're not forced by any means, but these are just the moves and the themes. And Al Yekin played h4, started a kingside pawn storm, and won the game. And you have to look it up. It's in his best pretty sure it's in volume 1 of his best game collection. But there's nothing wrong with knight takes d4. If it will revert to that position for me, please. Come on. Let's go. There we go. Okay. So both sides are developing their pieces, and white's got a little boardroom. One thing I can recommend, if you understand English descriptive notation, is to pick up the book by Reuben Fine, The Middle Game in Chess, and he talks about positions where White has, these are considered semi-open positions. White has a pawn on e4, and Black has a pawn on d6. White has this half-open file, Black has this half-open file. Reuben Fine, in his time, was a candidate for the World Championship and declined to play in the 1948 match. And he tied with Paul Carey's for a right to play Alyekin. Arguably, he was the top 3 in the world at his prime. So he devoted his attention to writing books than his profession as a psychologist, and didn't really take chess seriously. Now comes the old center fork trick, and that eliminates the semi-open position and makes it an open position because the center files are open, and I would say the game's dead even. Now here I think Black commits a strategic error with c5. The reason I don't like this move is White, because it blocks in this bishop. Okay, you don't want to make moves that restrict the development of your pieces. So let's try to find a better move. Well, let's see. You can't play knight c6. You're going to drop a pawn, right? If you play knight d7, you might. Well, knight d7 is actually okay. You might run into knight f5, but then this bishop can go to f6, and the game's more or less even. White can't. If White plays bishop f4, he's going to drop his b pawn. So, I mean, there's nothing making White play knight d4. White should just develop pieces. Probably logical is bishop f4, but here comes knight f6 and then bishop f3, and then c6 should be fine, and White has a slight lead in development, but Black has no weaknesses and should be fine. So c5 doesn't develop a piece. See, you always got to get those pieces out. And right now the entire Black queen side is sitting at home. Okay, so knight goes to f5 anyway. And now White gets the bishop pair. So that's kind of a plus for White. And I think it gives White somewhat of an advantage simply because the board is open. The bishops have mobility and scope, and Black's one remaining bishop, it's blocked in by that pawn. Knight declines the queen exchange and trains his sights on h2. White ignores that, develops. There's the h2 target. And suddenly Black's actually ahead in development. But White has the bishop pair. Now, probably what White should do is develop his queen, or maybe play a move like c3 to keep the knight out. But White still hasn't completed his development. But here White's batten down the hatches on the king side, and h3 and f3 are covered, and Black has no visible ways to assault that. And queen c1, I might have opted for queen h5. Queen h5 hits the c5 pawn and gets ready to oppose rooks on the d file if that file opens up. Anyway, queen c1 just seems a little out of play, but let's see, where are we? Now knight d4. Now there's a nasty threat. Got to cover that. And game's about even, but White's got some long-term prospects with those bishops. But here he's going to it's getting a little tricky here. Okay, now there's a pin on the knight, and maybe the black pawns are going to get butchered here. So White could capture this knight right now, and suddenly Black has one weakness, the pawn on f5. And, well, two weaknesses. Two, you could argue, the pawn on h7 and f7, they're all weak. So, strategically, White might have a winning ending if he takes this knight. But there's a lot of chess to be played. Now he takes here. Now, if black takes with the rook, you run into that bishop takes f5, so he takes with the pawn. Now, white's been able to keep his bishop pair, and now black does have a weakness, but just one of them. So white's got a slight plus here, and now he shuts his bishop in even further, but it didn't have much range and mobility anyway on this diagonal. You see, the bishop would really look good on c5, pressuring the f2 square. So now, I don't think this was the best choice here. But who might argue when black immediately blunders? White's got the bishop pair. Why not develop a rook? Let's develop a rook with tempo. Now there's a threat to play bishop takes f5 and queen takes d6, and black must stop and deal with this. Instead, white grabs this pawn. Grabs this knight, and you would expect black to play pawn takes bishop, but inexplicably, black blunders with queen c6. I just don't understand how this move can be played. Black's played a reasonable game so far, and he played reasonable in the other game until a blunder, and now apparently he's doing it about the same move number as the last time. So I don't know if there are any conditional moves sent in the game, but these both could have happened at the same time. He just rushed his moves and wasn't paying attention. Let's see. Let's bring that other game up. Not that one. I'm just looking at when did he blunder with... about the same... Well, almost the same time. Move 26 is when he played b takes c5. So maybe black was just rushing his moves, but I don't know if pawn takes. I don't know. I think black's okay here. White no longer has that extra bishop on the board, so he didn't. But who's to expect that your opponent's going to not take your piece and play here? Now the rest of the game requires very little comment because white's just a piece up. He stops and tempos this bishop, and now it's just a matter of liquidating things down. Check and pick up the queen, and look what it's doing. It's doing crazy things. Off come the rooks, and white's just up a piece in the ending, and that bishop's looking for targets. It's attacking a pawn, getting ready to go on the a7 g1 diagonal. It's going to get there, and one pawn bagged. Now it's just a matter of bringing the king into play and forcing the black king to retreat and picking up more pawns. And I don't know why black played on, but he did. He's going to play all the way on to checkmate. Well, we hated this if this happened when we played by postcard, but I guess on the internet these things happen quickly. It's no big deal. And there goes that little pawn. He's off and running. And now black's king is tied down to guarding it. And so he decides to give up a pawn and give white another queen or another pawn to make a queen. Here's a desperation move, hoping white's not paying attention. Sorry, didn't work. And, it's definitely resigns time, but he's going to play on to checkmate. There's two queens, and now just a quick mate and two. And there you have it. So I've seen blunders like this in other games in this match early on, the games where people were playing quickly. This was one of the longer matches because it just recently finished, but you do have to take your time in correspondence chess, okay? Anyway, again, I want to thank everybody that's looked at these videos, and congratulations to my team leading 303 to 116. You guys did great. And I know there are some games where we scored 2 points that there won't be a video made for. These were games that ended before anything really happened. Early timeouts, Maybe somebody was banned for cheating at move 5 or early resignation. There just wasn't enough in there to make a video. And as I said, barring a miracle, this will conclude the series. As I don't expect our man to win the game when he's down as a rook and a pawn against a rook, knight, and 2 pawns. But stranger things have happened, as we've seen. Thanks again, everybody, and look for my other videos and learn a lot about chess. You will, I promise. Thank you.